For as long as schools have existed, assessments have been designed and delivered by teachers. Students, in turn, have been expected to sit, receive, and respond. The system is orderly and efficient, but it is also lopsided. Students become passive participants in their own evaluation, judged by questions they did not create, formats they did not choose, and criteria they often do not fully understand. Flipping the model changes the dynamic. What if students themselves designed assessments? What if they used artificial intelligence as a tool to brainstorm, draft, refine, and even critique test questions? What if assessment was not something done to students, but something co-created with them? This shift is not a gimmick. When students create assessments, they reveal their understanding in a different dimension. To write a strong question, a student must first grasp the concept, then anticipate how someone else might solve it, and finally craft it with clarity. They must think like both learner and teacher. This act of designing questions is itself a form of higher-order thinking, one that blends creativity, precision, and reflection. The act of creating a question is not the same as answering one. Answering can be mechanical, but creating requires synthesis. A student who can solve a problem about slope might still stumble when asked to generate a question about slope, because generating requires a deeper grasp of what slope is and how it can be represented. When students attempt to create, they surface the edges of their own understanding. Teachers can then see those edges more clearly and address them directly. Ownership is another dimension. Students often approach tests with dread, as if they are facing a judgment handed down from above, but when they are invited to design questions, they feel a sense of participation. Their creativity is reflected in the assessment process. If a peer solves their question successfully, it feels like a validation not only of the solver's knowledge, but of the questioner's craft. The classroom begins to feel less like a place where knowledge is delivered and checked, and more like a community where knowledge is exchanged. Metacognition also comes into play. To generate questions, students must ask themselves, what does mastery of this skill actually look like? What makes one problem harder than another? How much information should I provide in the wording, and how much should I leave for the solver to figure out? These are sophisticated questions about learning itself, and grappling with them helps students become more reflective, independent thinkers. Without support, student-generated assessments can be messy. Questions may be too vague, too easy, or too confusing. Teachers, already stretched for time, may hesitate to sift through dozens of poorly constructed items. This is where AI becomes a practical partner. Imagine a student tasked with creating a few practice questions about slope. On their own, they might write something simplistic. Find the slope of a line. With Magic School AI, however, they can prompt the system. Write 3 practice questions about slope, from easy to challenging. The AI provides a set of drafts. The student now has a foundation to edit, critique, or solve. Perhaps they decide one question is wordy, another is confusing, and the third is just right. The process of editing AI's output sharpens their sense of what makes a good assessment item. In this way, AI becomes a scaffold. It lowers the barrier to entry so that even students who lack confidence in writing problems can participate meaningfully. At the same time, it prevents teachers from being overwhelmed with incoherent drafts. Instead, students and AI co-create, while teachers guide the refinement. Picture a 9th grade algebra class working on systems of equations. Instead of the teacher handing out a quiz, she asks students to generate their own questions using AI. Each student prompts Magic School to produce a handful of systems problems. They then choose one to keep, edit it for clarity, and solve it themselves. The next day, the teacher compiles the best student-edited questions into a class quiz. Students sit down to take it, knowing that some of the questions were shaped by their peers. The atmosphere shifts. Instead of being passive test takers, they are active contributors to the assessment process. In a 7th grade geometry class, students are asked to design a project on area and perimeter. With AI, they generate scenarios. One about designing a garden, another about building a basketball court, another about painting murals on school walls. Students critique the drafts, refine them, and add constraints to make them more interesting. They then swap projects with classmates, who must solve them. Not only do students practice geometry, but they also see how math connects to contexts that feel real. At the elementary level, a 4th grade teacher experimenting with multiplication invites students to write their own word problems. Many struggle with framing, so she introduces AI. Students dictate scenarios, make a problem about dogs and cats, and the AI turns those into structured questions. The children edit them, ensuring the numbers make sense, and then share them with peers. What might have been a routine drill becomes a lively exercise in creativity and ownership. Of course, giving students access to AI for assessment design raises important questions. Should students be trusted to generate their own assessments with such powerful tools? What if they rely on AI too heavily, copying outputs instead of engaging critically? What about the risk of errors in AI-generated questions? These are legitimate concerns, and they point to the need for careful framing. Students should be taught that AI is a collaborator, not a replacement. The task is not to paste an AI output into a quiz, but to edit it, critique it, and improve it. Teachers should model how to question AI results. Is this problem aligned with what we're studying? Is it clear? Is it solvable? By positioning AI as a draft generator and the student as the editor, we keep the intellectual responsibility with the learner. Accuracy is another issue. AI outputs should never be accepted uncritically. Teachers can mitigate this risk by establishing routines for verification. Students might be required to solve every problem they create to prove it works. Peer review can also help. One student creates, another solves, and both reflect on the quality of the item. These practices not only safeguard accuracy, but deepen learning. For teachers to embrace this model, they need support. A powerful professional development exercise is to flip the script on teachers themselves. In a workshop, they are asked to generate questions on a familiar math concept, then run their drafts through AI for refinement. Teachers quickly realize the difficulties their students will face, how hard it is to balance clarity, rigor, and creativity. They also see the value of AI in scaffolding the process. Next, teachers simulate the classroom activity. They feed Magic School a prompt, such as create 3 questions about ratios, then edit the results as if they were students. They swap their questions with colleagues, solve them, and provide feedback. The workshop ends with a discussion. What did we learn about our own understanding by trying to create questions? What might students learn? How can we set boundaries to ensure AI is used ethically and effectively? These sessions not only prepare teachers for logistics, but also shift their mindset. They begin to see assessment not as a fixed endpoint, but as a flexible, co-constructed process. One way to formalize this in practice is through a student-led assessment project. The teacher introduces a unit, say, linear functions. Instead of a traditional unit test, students are tasked with building a test themselves. In small groups, they use AI to brainstorm question drafts. They critique the drafts, revise them, and select a final set. Each group is responsible for contributing a few items to the class test. The teacher curates the submissions, ensuring alignment and fairness, and compiles the class-created test. Students then sit down to take it. They recognize some of the questions. Perhaps they wrote them, or perhaps their peers did. But the act of seeing their work validated in the official assessment changes their relationship to the test. It is no longer an alien task imposed from above, but something they had a hand in shaping. The project concludes with reflection. Students discuss what they learned from creating questions, how their thinking changed, and what they noticed about the difference between solving problems and writing them. Teachers report that students are more engaged, more thoughtful, and more willing to grapple with mistakes when they feel ownership over the process. The idea of student-generated assessments is more than a classroom technique. It points toward a different philosophy of learning. In a world where AI can provide endless practice problems, the real skill is not solving every problem quickly, but knowing how to frame meaningful ones. Students who learn to generate, critique, and refine assessment tasks are developing precisely the kind of reflective and creative skills that will serve them in higher education, careers, and life. With AI as a support, the barriers that once made this approach impractical are lowered. Students do not need to struggle endlessly to draft a coherent problem. AI can provide a starting point. Teachers do not need to worry about editing every submission from scratch. AI can help polish and vet drafts. The process becomes feasible, scalable, and sustainable. The ethical questions remain, and they are important. Students must be guided to use AI responsibly, to maintain ownership of their learning, and to respect the integrity of the assessment process. But these are not obstacles. They are opportunities. They allow schools to teach digital literacy and ethical reasoning in the context of real, meaningful work. If embraced thoughtfully, creative and student-generated assessments can transform the culture of classrooms. They can shift the balance of power, elevate student voice, and redefine assessment as something collaborative rather than hierarchical. In this vision, teachers remain essential guides. AI provides structure and support, and students step into a role too often denied to them, authors of their own learning journey.